Introduction. My colleague Phil tripped down his basement steps and landed hard on his head. For a few moments as he lay on the floor, his arms and shoulders tingling, he thought he was paralyzed. Too wobbly to stand up, he sat against a wall and assessed the damage. The tingling in his limbs meant he still retained feeling. His head and neck were throbbing. He could feel blood trickling down his back from a lacerated scalp. He knew that he needed to go to a nurse so they could clean up the wound and check for broken bones and internal bleeding. He also knew he was in no shape to drive himself. It was a Saturday morning. Phil's wife and grown sons were not home. He was alone in his quiet suburban house. He pulled his cell phone out to call for help. As he scrolled through names, he realized he didn't have a single friend nearby whom he felt comfortable calling in an emergency. He'd never made the effort to know his neighbors. Reluctant to call 911 since he wasn't gushing blood or having a heart attack, Phil tracked down the home number of a middle-aged couple a few houses away and dialed. A woman named Kay answered, someone he acknowledged on the street but had rarely spoken to. He explained his situation and Kay rushed over, entering Phil's home through an unlocked back door. She found Phil in the basement, helped him to his feet, and drove him to the local hospital. Staying with him during the 5 hours he was examined. Yes, he'd suffered a concussion, the doctors said, and he'd be in pain for a few weeks. But nothing was broken and he'd recover. Kay drove him back to his house. Resting in his dark house later that day, Phil thought about how close he had come to disaster. He recalled the moment when his head hit the floor. The bright, brittle sound at impact, like a hammer coming down on a marble counter and shattering the stone into tiny pieces. He remembered the electrical charge coursing through his limbs and the terror he felt at the prospect of never walking again. He thought about how lucky he was. But Phil's fall triggered more than gratitude for not being crippled. He also reflected on the remarkable kindness of his neighbor Kay, and how she had selflessly given up her day for him. For the first time in years, he thought about how he was living his life. Phil told himself, I need to get better at making friends. Not because he might need people like Kay to save him in the future, but because he wanted to become more like Kay. Not all of us require a violent, life-threatening knock on the head to change our behavior. It only seems that way. This is a book about adult behavioral change. Why are we so bad at it? How do we get better at it? How do we choose what to change? How do we make others appreciate that we've changed? How can we strengthen our resolve to wrestle with the timeless, omnipresent challenge any successful person must stare down, becoming the person we want to be? To answer these questions, I'll begin by focusing on the triggers in our environment. Their impact is profound. A trigger is any stimulus that reshapes our thoughts and actions. In every waking hour we are being triggered by people, events, and circumstances that have the potential to change us. These triggers appear suddenly and unexpectedly. They can be major moments, like Phil's concussion, or as minor as a paper cut. They can be pleasant, like a teacher's praise that elevates our discipline and ambition and turns our life around 180 degrees. Or they can be counterproductive, like an ice cream cone that tempts us off our diet or peer pressure that confuses us into doing something we know is wrong. They can stir our competitive instincts, from the common workplace carrot of a bigger paycheck to the annoying sight of a rival outdistancing us. They can drain us, like the news that a loved one is seriously ill or that our company is up for sale. They can be as elemental as the sound of rain triggering a sweet memory. Triggers are practically infinite in number. Where do they come from? Why do they make us behave against our interests? Why are we oblivious to them? How do we pinpoint the triggering moments that anger us, or throw us off course, or make us feel that all is right in the world, so we can avoid the bad ones, repeat the good ones? How do we make triggers work for us? Our environment is the most potent triggering mechanism in our lives, and not always for our benefit. We make plans, set goals, and stake our happiness on achieving these goals. But our environment constantly intervenes. The smell of bacon wafts up from the kitchen, and we forget our doctor's advice about lowering our cholesterol. Our colleagues work late every night, so we feel obliged to match their commitment and miss one of our kids' baseball games. Then another. Our phone chirps, and we glance at the glowing screen instead of looking into the eyes of the person we love. This is how our environment triggers undesirable behavior. Because our environmental factors are so often outside of our control, we may think there is not much we can do about them. We feel like victims of circumstance, puppets of fate. I don't accept that. Fate is the hand of cards we've been dealt. Choice is how we play the hand. Despite a hard knock on the head, Phil didn't bend to circumstance. His fate was to fall, hit his head, and recover. His choice was to become a better neighbor. There's an emotion we're all familiar with hovering over these pages rather than coursing through them. It's not explicit, but that doesn't mean it's less real. It's the feeling of regret. It's implied every time we ask ourselves why we haven't become the person we want to be. A big part of my research for this book involved asking people the simple question: what's the biggest behavioral change you've ever made? The answers run the gamut, but the most poignant ones, guaranteed to raise the emotional temperature in the room, come from people recalling the behavior they should have changed but didn't. They're reflecting on their failure to become the person they wanted to be, and it often overwhelms them with desolate feelings of regret. We are not like Jane Austen's overbearing Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who boasts of her natural taste in music. Then, without a 16th note of irony, says, "If I had ever learned, I should have been a great proficient." Unlike Lady Catherine, we feel regret's sharp sting when we reflect on the opportunities squandered, the choices deferred, the efforts not made, the talents never developed in our lives, usually when it's too late to do much about it. Regret was definitely in the air when I interviewed Tim, a once powerful executive producer of a network sports division. Tim's network career ended prematurely when he was in his mid-40s because he didn't get along with his superiors. A decade later, in his mid-50s, Tim was getting by with consulting jobs. He still had an expertise that companies needed, but he would never find the stable executive position he once had. He has a reputation, doesn't play well with others. Tim has had years to confront the reasons for this reputation, but he never articulated them until the day his daughter asked for fatherly advice before she started her first TV job. "I told her the greatest virtue is patience," Tim said. "You're operating in a business where everyone's looking at the clock. A show starts and ends precisely at a given time. The control booth screens display everything in hundredths of a second, and it never stops. There's always another show to do. The clock is always ticking. This creates an incredible sense of urgency in everyone. But if you're in charge, it also tests your patience. You want everything done now, or even sooner. You become very demanding, and when you don't get what you want, you can get frustrated and angry. You start treating people as the enemy. They're not only disappointing you but making you look bad. And then you get angry." That was a triggering moment for Tim. Until he said it, he hadn't realized how much his professional impatience was influenced by a savage network TV environment, and how it had seeped into other parts of his life. He explained, "I saw that I'm the kind of guy who emails a friend and gets mad if I don't hear back within the hour. Then I start harassing that friend for ignoring me. Basically, I'm treating my friends the way I used to treat production assistants. It's how I face the world. That's no way to live." Tim needed an intimate father-daughter encounter to trigger an insight that fed the powerful feeling of regret. "If I could change anything about my life," he concluded, "I'd be more patient." Regret is the emotion we experience when we assess our present circumstances and reconsider how we got here. We replay what we actually did against what we should have done, and find ourselves wanting in some way. Regret can hurt. For such a penetrating and wounding emotion, regret doesn't get much respect. We treat it as a benign factor, something to deny or rationalize away. We tell ourselves, "I've made stupid choices, but they've made me who I am today." Lamenting the past is a waste of time. "I learned my lesson. Let's move on." That's one way of looking at regret, if only as a form of self-protection from the pain of knowing we missed out. We're comforted by the fact that no one is immune to regret and that time heals all wounds. I want to suggest a different attitude, namely embracing regret. The pain that comes with regret should be mandatory, not something to be shooed away like an annoying pet. When we make bad choices and fail ourselves or hurt the people we love, we should feel pain. That pain can be motivating and, in the best sense, triggering. A reminder that maybe we messed up but we can do better. It's one of the most powerful feelings guiding us to change. If I do my job properly here and you do your part, two things will happen. One, you will move closer to becoming the person you want to be, and two, you'll have less regret. Shall we get started? Part 1. Why don't we become the person we want to be? Chapter 1. The Immutable Truths of Behavioral Change. As an executive coach, I've been helping successful leaders achieve positive, lasting change in behavior for more than 35 years. While almost all of my clients embrace the opportunity to change, some are a little reluctant in the beginning. Most are aware of the fact that behavioral change will help them become more effective leaders, partners, and even family members. A few are not. My process of helping clients is straightforward and consistent. I interview and listen to my clients' key stakeholders. These stakeholders could be their colleagues, direct reports, or board members. I accumulate a lot of confidential feedback. Then I go over the summary of this feedback with my clients. My clients take ultimate responsibility for the behavioral changes that they want to make. My job is then very simple. I help my clients achieve positive, lasting change in the behavior that they choose as judged by key stakeholders that they choose. If my clients succeed in achieving this positive change, as judged by their stakeholders, I get paid. If the key stakeholders do not see positive change, I don't get paid. Our odds of success improve because I'm with the client every step of the way, telling him or her how to stay on track and not regress to a former self. But that doesn't diminish the importance of these two immutable truths. Truth number 1. Meaningful behavioral change is very hard to do. It's hard to initiate behavioral change, even harder to stay the course, hardest of all to make the change stick. I'd go so far as to say that adult behavioral change is the most difficult thing for sentient human beings to accomplish. If you think I'm overstating its difficulty, answer these questions. What do you want to change in your life? It could be something major, such as your weight, your job, or your career. It could be something minor, such as changing your hairstyle or checking in with your mother more often or changing the wall color in your living room. It's not my place to judge what you want to change. How long has this been going on? For how many months or years have you risen in the morning and told yourself some variation on the phrase, "This is the day I make a change"? How's that working out? In other words, can you point to a specific moment when you decided to change something in your life and you acted on the impulse and it worked out to your satisfaction? The three questions conform to the three problems we face in introducing change into our lives. We can't admit that we need to change, either because we're unaware that a change is desirable, or, more likely, we're aware but have reasoned our way into elaborate excuses that deny our need for change. In the following pages, we'll examine and dispense with the deep-seated beliefs that trigger our resistance to change. We do not appreciate inertia's power over us. Given the choice, we prefer to do nothing, which is why I suspect our answers to "how long has this been going on" are couched in terms of years rather than days. Inertia is the reason we never start the process of change. It takes extraordinary effort to stop doing something in our comfort zone in order to start something difficult that will be good for us in the long run. I cannot supply the required effort in this book. That's up to you. But through a simple process emphasizing structure and self-monitoring, I can provide you with the kickstart that triggers and sustains positive change. We don't know how to execute a change. There's a difference between motivation and understanding and ability. For example, we may be motivated to lose weight, but we lack the nutritional understanding and cooking ability to design and stick with an effective diet. Or flip it over, we have understanding and ability but lack the motivation. One of the central tenets of this book is that our behavior is shaped, both positively and negatively, by our environment, and that a keen appreciation of our environment can dramatically lift not only our motivation, ability, and understanding of the change process, but also our confidence that we can actually do it. I vividly recall my first decisive behavioral change as an adult. I was 26 years old, married to my first and only wife, Lida, and pursuing a doctorate in organizational behavior at the University of California, Los Angeles. Since high school I had been a follically challenged man, but back then I was loath to admit it. Each morning I would spend several minutes in front of the bathroom mirror carefully arranging the wispy blonde strands of hair still remaining on the top of my head. I'd smooth the hairs forward from back to front, then curve them to a point in the middle of my forehead, forming a pattern that looked vaguely like a laurel wreath. Then I'd walk out into the world with my ridiculous comb over, convinced I looked normal like everyone else. When I visited my barber, I'd give specific instructions on how to cut my hair. One morning I dozed off in the chair, so he trimmed my hair too short, leaving insufficient foliage on the sides to execute my comb-over regimen. I could have panicked and put on a hat for a few weeks, waiting for the strands to grow back. But as I stood in front of the mirror later that day, staring at my reflected image, I said to myself, "Face it, you're bald. It's time you accepted it." That's the moment when I decided to shave the few remaining hairs on the top of my head and live my life as a bald man. It wasn't a complicated decision and it didn't take great effort to accomplish. A short trim at the barber from then on. But in many ways, it is still the most liberating change I've made as an adult. It made me happy, at peace with my appearance. I'm not sure what triggered my acceptance of a new way of self-grooming. Perhaps I was horrified at the prospect of starting every day with this routine forever. Or maybe it was the realization that I wasn't fooling anyone. The reason doesn't matter. The real achievement is that I actually decided to change and successfully acted on that decision. That's not easy to do. I had spent years fretting and fussing with my hair. That's a long time to continue doing something that I knew, on the spectrum of human folly, fell somewhere between vain and idiotic. And yet I persisted in this foolish behavior for so many years because I couldn't admit that I was bald, and under the sway of inertia, I found it easier to continue doing my familiar routine than change my ways. The one advantage I had was I knew how to execute the change. Unlike most changes, for example, getting in shape, learning a new language, or becoming a better listener, it didn't require months of discipline and measuring and following up, nor did it require the cooperation of others. I just needed to stop giving my barber crazy instructions and let him do his job. If only all our behavioral changes were so uncomplicated. Truth number 2, no one can make us change unless we truly want to change. This should be self-evident. Change has to come from within. It can't be dictated, demanded, or otherwise forced upon people. A man or woman who does not wholeheartedly commit to change will never change. I didn't absorb this simple truth until my 12th year in the change business. By then I had done intensive one-on-one coaching with more than 100 executives, nearly all successes but a smattering of failures, too. As I reviewed my failures, one conclusion leapt out. Some people say they want to change, but they don't really mean it. I had erred profoundly in client selection. I believed the clients when they said they were committed to changing, but I had not drilled deeper to determine if they were telling the truth. Not long after this revelation, I was asked to work with Harry, the chief operating officer of a large consulting firm. Harry was a smart, motivated, hardworking deliver-the-numbers alpha male who was also arrogant and over-delighted with himself. He was habitually disrespectful to his direct reports, driving several of them away to work for the competition. This development rattled the CEO, hence the call to me to coach Harry. Harry talked a good game at first, assuring me that he was eager to get started and get better. I interviewed his colleagues and direct reports, even his wife and teenage children. They all told the same story. Despite his abundant professional qualities, Harry had an overwhelming need to be the smartest person in the room, always proving that he was right, winning every argument. It was exhausting and off-putting. Who could say how many opportunities had vanished because people loathed being pummeled and browbeaten? As Harry and I reviewed his 360-degree feedback, he claimed to value the opinions of his co-workers and family members. Yet whenever I brought up an area for improvement, Harry would explain point by point how his questionable behavior was actually justified. He'd remind me that he majored in psychology in college and then analyzed the behavioral problems of everyone around him, concluding that they needed to change. In a mind-bending display of chutzpah, he asked me for suggestions in helping these people get better. In my younger days, I would have overlooked Harry's resistance. Mimicking his arrogance and denial, I would have convinced myself that I could help Harry where lesser mortals would fail. Fortunately, I remembered my earlier lesson. Some people say they want to change, but they don't really mean it. It was dawning on me that Harry was using our work together as another opportunity to display his superiority and to reverse the misperceptions of all the confused people surrounding him, including his wife and kids. By our fourth meeting, I gave up the ghost. I told Harry that my coaching wouldn't be helpful to him and we parted ways. I felt neither joy nor surprise when I later learned that the firm had fired Harry. Evidently, the CEO had concluded that an individual who actively resists help has maxed out professionally and personally. I often call up my time with Harry as a stark example that, even when altering our behavior represents all reward and no risk, and clinging to the status quo can cost us our careers and relationships. We resist change. We're even defeated by change when it's a matter of life and death. Consider how hard it is to break a bad habit such as smoking. It's so daunting that, despite the threat of cancer and widespread social disapproval, 2/3 of smokers who say they'd like to quit never even try. And of those who do try, 9 out of 10 fail. And of those who eventually quit, namely the most motivated and disciplined people, on average they fail 6 times before succeeding. Compared to other behavioral changes in our lives, smoking is a relatively simple challenge. After all, it's a self-contained behavior. It's just you and your habit, a lone individual dealing with one demon. You either lick it or you don't. It's up to you, and only you, to declare victory. No one else gets a say in the matter. Imagine how much harder it is when you let other people into the process, people whose actions are unpredictable, beyond your control, and their responses can affect your success. It's the difference between hitting warm-up tennis balls over the net and playing a match where an opponent is rocketing the balls back at you. That's what makes adult behavioral change so hard. If you want to be a better partner at home or a better manager at work, you not only have to change your ways, you have to get some buy-in from your partner or co-workers. Everyone around you has to recognize that you're changing. Relying on other people increases the degree of difficulty exponentially. Let that last sentence sink in before you turn the page. This is not a book about stopping a bad habit such as smoking cigarettes or dealing with your late-night craving for ice cream. Nicotine and ice cream aren't the target constituency here. It's about changing your behavior when you're among people you respect and love. They are your target audience. What makes positive, lasting behavioral change so challenging, and causes most of us to give up early in the game, is that we have to do it in our imperfect world, full of triggers that may pull and push us off course. The good news is that behavioral change does not have to be complicated. As you absorb the methods in the following pages, do not be lulled into dismissiveness because my advice sounds simple. Achieving meaningful and lasting change may be simple, simpler than we imagine, but simple is far from easy.